move this coming year in all kinds of areas, from making sure that older people and aging people still stay on track with technological issues so they can be part of what's going on and communicate with their children and grandchildren and do all those crazy online things that everyone loves to do these days. But then certainly there is this issue of being a wheelchair user in Italy. And the question that Jill asked is, what about accessibility in Italy? Well, first of all, in Italy's defense, it's a pretty challenging place because so many of the locations, historic locations, have been around forever, so the roads just weren't built for wheelchair accessibility. So we've got to make sure that we up our game as a country in that regard. And I do see that happening. I have been amazed to hear Jill's story. And in doing some research and getting myself better informed on the topic, I've run across lots of people online who have some kind of wheelchair user concern, and they might have multiple sclerosis, or they might have been in some kind of an accident, which makes them permanent wheelchair user. There are all kinds of different reasons, but what I have seen with some of these people I have found virtually and online who have very generously created websites to help others who are also wheelchair users, I've been amazed by their courageousness and the amount of traveling and activity they're willing to take upon themselves in places like Italy that still has a long way to go in terms of making sure that mobility and physical disability persons are able to be included and participate in all the wonderful aspects of what Italy has to offer. One of the people is John Sage, and he's a founder and CEO of Accessible Travel Solutions. He points out that people with disabilities make up 20% of the population. So that's 1/5 of our population. We really have to think about inclusion and accessibility for that 1/5 of our population, which is huge. I did a podcast episode last year or the year before. It was all about art access for the blind at the Vatican above all, but some of the other monuments in Rome. So you can access that by going onto my website and have a listen to that. But most specifically addressing Jill's concern and her life here in Italy as a wheelchair user gets me back to a person like John Sage. And that's exactly what he does. And he's worked out a whole website with all kinds of just tips and so forth, but also travel solutions that you can look at and book. I came across an amazing woman who has a website called worldonwheelsblog.com. And her name is Kristen. She has muscular dystrophy, and she says it makes it challenging at times, but it doesn't keep her from doing what she loves. And one of those passions is travel. When she's home, she can walk somewhat independently or with a cane for short distances, and when she's on flat ground. But otherwise, she does need to have wheelchair access. Despite the fact that she's differently able, she doesn't let it get in the way of her passion for travel. Take a look at her website, and I'll put a link for it in the show notes. She posts some trip reports about where she's been and their accessibility, and ideas and inspiration to help you discover new accessible places to journey to. And then some general resources and things to think about when planning your trip. As you know, I'm based in Rome, so that's a focus for me. And Rome is truly a challenge. I mean, think of all the Sanpietrini, which is the name for the cobblestones. And I have trouble walking along them myself, and I can't imagine riding over them with a bike or a wheelchair because they are just so lumpy, and quite frequently they're in need of repair as well. She outlines 11 things to do in a wheelchair accessible Rome. And they include all the major things like the Roman Forum and Piazza Navona, the Pantheon, the Trevi Fountain. She also writes about where to stay in Rome as a wheelchair user. And she particularly indicates the Hotel Indigo Rome and the Aleph Rome Hotel. She goes into all kinds of details that you'll want to know, and her hands-on experience for things like visiting the Sistine Chapel. And she talks about how the elevator is quite small that takes you up to where you can enter the chapel. She also writes about a day trip to Pompeii and the Amalfi Coast. And apparently, while a day trip to Pompeii may present some challenges, there is an accessible entrance and pathway will allow you to see many of the highlights. She does suggest, and a lot of people suggest, that it makes sense to get a guide to assist you. Although you might find in your readings that a certain spot is wheelchair accessible, when you actually get there, you might find there are some hurdles that you have to face. And that's why I particularly was interested in what Kristen has to say and what John Sage has to say, because they are both wheelchair users. So they really understand and have experienced doing these things themselves and visiting these places themselves. They pretty much say it's a good idea to get a guide who can help you through the process. Kristen suggests 2 companies that provide accessible guided tours in Italy that she really likes. And one is called Disabled Accessible Travel, and that's disabledaccessibletravel.com. And they offer these short excursions and guided tours really throughout Europe. They have a variety of accessible tours in Rome, as well as some other Italian towns. And then the other one she suggests is Rome and Italy Accessible. And they specialize, again, in Italian travel. And they really take care of all your specialized needs. They have the availability of using specialized wheelchairs to make some of the most challenging terrain more accessible. And that's the same thing that another woman has to say, JennySmithRollsOn.com. She mentioned specifically these Sanpietrini or cobblestones, which they're basically 5-inch by 5-inch stone squares. And some streets have curb cuts, but many don't. She suggests, and others who have traveled with a wheelchair to Italy and especially Rome have suggested the freewheel. So go to the website www.gofreewheel.com. And it's an attachment that's a must-use for a manual wheelchair user. Basically, it attaches to the footrest of your wheelchair, and transforms it into a 3-wheel all-terrain vehicle. So you can push your way through grass and gravel, uneven surfaces like the San Pietrini in Rome, and even snow and the beach become much, much easier, and the user experiences more confidence wherever they travel. There are 2 distributors in Italy. One is allmobility.org, and the other is Panthera, and I'll include that link on the show notes.